and welcome to the Cambridge University Press sponsored webinar, Alternative Assessments. Jenny and I are delighted to have Stefanie Gigante and Stefanie Spaulding return as our guest presenters this evening. Stefanie Gigante has done several webinars for us and was also a presenter at our summer workshops last summer. She is a certified Google trainer and Pear Deck trainer, and also a technology innovation specialist in her district. She teaches at Ridgewood High School in New Jersey. And Stefanie Spaulding was also a presenter last summer at our summer workshops and is a longtime Cambridge user. And she teaches at Hamden Hall Country Day School in Hamden, Connecticut. And in addition to teaching, Stefanie is a writer and a podcaster. And we are very much looking forward to hearing all about these alternative assessments at this time of year. We are recording the webinar as usual, and we will post the link in a few days on the NACCP website at cambridgelatin.org, and it will also be on the Cambridge University Press YouTube channel on their Latin teaching support page. And once again, if you need a certificate for this evening's presentation, just reach out to us at clctraining@cambridge.org, and we'll get that to you as soon as possible.
And just we have two more workshops, two more webinars coming up. One is on music and art that goes along with the Cambridge Latin course, focusing a lot on Unit 3. And the other one is Sammy Smith is going to do one on using the 3D printers and giving kids a chance to hold things and how you can work with your STEM program at your school. And that's at the end of the month. So we have just two more, and then we'll be announcing soon our summer workshops.
All right, great, thanks. We'll share out our presentation. And if you want to consult back with it, back to our slideshow, I put a link for you to save for later in the chat. So.
All right. So, present here. Okay, super. So welcome everyone. We are Stefanie squared. We're talking tonight about alternative assessments in a bunch of different ways, both in terms of their philosophy, as well as showing you some examples of things we've done that fit the bill for this.
And this year has really brought to the forefront, what are we going to do about assessing when we have hybrid and remote scenarios? You know, what are we going to do about our assessments? So before we talk about assessing in a hybrid situation, we just want to kind of revisit the idea of, you know, why do we assess? We're also going to talk about the, you know, how to design valuable assessments for hybrid teaching. We want to share some of the things that Stefanie and I have tried this year that we think have worked, so that you have some ideas to try as we go into this last quarter of the year. And then think about how our experiences this year has actually changed. I was speaking for myself personally here too, really changed my attitude toward assessing and how I use it in the classroom as well. So that's just a little overview of what we're going to go through today.
So assessments have a bunch of different philosophies that go into it, and whereas we're not here tonight to you know, preach to you to get you to change your outlook on what you view assessment as in your classroom, we're going to try to think about or offer to you what our interpretation of assessment has been, can be, and you know, has sort of been forced to be modified again throughout the pandemic, and our understanding of our students and what they need. So, you know, I think in the past, I at least have relied on more traditional assessments. I've used it to check for specific proficiency or knowledge in a very, you know, certain area, and that check tends to be pretty pointed. And it tends to be pretty exacting to make sure I know exactly what my kids know. There's a lot of memorization that goes into traditional assessments. And it's just, it's the nature of it. And, one thing that Stephanie and I were talking about when we were planning out our webinar tonight, we were talking about how we all grew up in a time of very traditional assessments regularly. And so our understanding of assessment is sort of rooted a lot in who we were as students and what we were made to do in our own classrooms as students. And so it is very hard, I think, to sort of let go of that and to think about things in a different way when, I would say for all of us, and, I would say any teacher who is, over the age of 30, I think that we all learned in a really traditional way through very traditional teachers. And it's not a disparaging comment, it's just that was the way we learned. And I think that education has really shifted dramatically since then. And so, this is our opportunity then to sort of rethink, like, why are we assessing? Are we assessing in the ways that we did or for the reasons that we are because of who we were as students? Or, are we assessing for things that we are valuing in our current classrooms on the other side of the desk?
And in the landscape of traditional assessments, our experience in the last year has been, well, we can't do this anymore. I can't ask them to do this. I can't ask them to do this because they can use, all these different resources. So if I can't do the traditional things that I've done and ensure that there's not cheating and other things going on, then what can I do? What can I ask and how can I assess going forward?
And so as we start to explore this question, we wanted to think about non-traditional assessment and the things that we've been doing in our classes. Is it possible to check for students' progress between point A and point B? The first time that you gave a list of vocabulary words, how many words could the students define without looking at anything? And then, is the definition amount going up even incrementally over a week's time or 2 weeks' time or something like that? Also applying knowledge. So not just what does this vocabulary word mean, but how does that definition of the word relate to the context of Latin as a whole language? Like, in what context could the student use it for a productive experience versus just like the rote memorization of what the word actually means? And then, we've also been thinking about prioritizing the idea of formative assessment versus summative. So formative is taking assessment in a more of a modicum of a pattern versus summative, which tends to encompass like, entire units or entire marking periods, or in the case of a final exam, the entire year. So whereas, and part of this too, as you start to envision this, part of it is going to, it's going to have to translate with your district and your department and the grading expectations that are placed upon you by the powers that be. So, one of the things that you're going to start thinking about, hopefully, is, how you can make the things that we're suggesting or the concepts that we're talking about tonight, how can you make that fit into a traditional grade book? Because I assume that most of us have a traditional grading software that we are required to use to a certain extent. So, how do we make that transition between, just a quiz grade of, memorization versus a grade that assesses a student's progress within a certain area?
And I would also jump in and say too, that my experience has been when I want to discourage certain bad habits in my students, like finding translations online, using Google Translate, seeking Quizlets will give the answers. When I downplay the grading outcome and just talk about this as an activity or an assessment, my students are a lot less likely to grasp for those bad habits. So basically, if I want to assess and get really good data about my students and their actual ability with certain skills, minimizing the grade consequence is going to give me really solid data about that. The moment I start monetizing and this becomes a high stakes assessment, the more the students are going to reach for bad habits. So in my own practice, I've actually there's been a divergence between producing grades and assessing for data and progress. And that's it's a kind of a bit of a balancing act, because you want there to be some continuity there. But I think that especially in our remote climate, my students have been very honest when the grading stakes are very low. And when the grading stakes get high, that's when they lean on bad habits. So that's been one of the big things that's informed my choices with assessing this year.
And, continuing from what Stephanie was just talking about, the hybrid environment, the online environment, I mean, there are so many things that we have to think about. Students have access to so many things all at the same time. And, it is very, very challenging to provide traditional assessments in this fashion. So, we're trying to think about and reimagine our own assessments in a way that they become uncheatable. So, using an open book approach, saying, okay, you can have the translation to a story available to you, but what we want to know is how can you apply the knowledge of the story? How can you apply the character development that's happening within a story? Like, are you paying attention enough to the development of the story from sentence 1 to sentence 30, or are you really just relying on, an open translation? So, that I think is a truer assessment of a student's skill versus just, do they have a translation available to them? As Stephanie was saying, we try to do low stakes assessment. We try to do frequent things too, so that students have lots of opportunities to show their proficiency in a variety of different areas. In our examples that we're going to show you tonight too, we also want to really engage their creative side because, again, partially because of the pandemic, they don't have as many opportunities to develop that innovation. They can't go into the makerspace anymore. Their art classes are probably pretty limited with what they're able to do. So, giving alternative assessments could give students a vehicle to express themselves in a variety of different ways that they don't necessarily have the opportunity to regularly.
And a lot of students do talk about boredom that's happened in remote. I'm sitting in front of a computer for hours on end. It can be depressing and very unengaging. So when we think of creative, different assignments, if there's a kind of assignment on the syllabus that, oh, wait, I've never done this. Oh, wait, this is some kind of a Latin dot to dot, riddle thing, like that's going to be the first thing they do for homework, not the last thing for homework. So anything that is different, creative, or, unique is going to get their attention, I think, and make it more exciting.
Mm-hmm. And, we also have envisioned alternative assessments as a way of reaching our students from a social emotional level, I should say. This last bullet point we have here, we think that alternative assessments help students understand you as a flexible teacher and a human too, because you're not a teacher who's so rigorous and so sort of blindsided to what the students are going through that you have not, or that you're refusing rather to reimagine something. I think it shows a lot of depth to the students if you can offer assessments that measure different things in different ways, because I think it reveals a lot of, as I said, your humanity toward the kids. I often think about, what will my students remember in 5 to 10 years? They're going to remember that schools are shut down. They're going to remember that they were constantly shuffling between in-person and remote education. They're going to remember that they were staring at a screen all day. They're probably not going to remember what a participle is. I have to cut my losses where they are. They're probably not going to remember what the pluperfect tense is. So, what can I make for them, for their experiences that they're going to remember, but that they're going to remember fondly? I want them to remember that Magister Gigante allowed me to retake something, or allowed me to, or gave me this really great quiz grade just because I did, 3 homework assignments about that same topic, or, something like that. I want them to reflect on their experience with me through a positive lens. And I don't want it to be, oh man, she had the hardest tests. They were always these gotcha type of questions.
And I would also say that if we design assessments well and then give feedback in a constructive way, the ultimate goal then is to get our students to reflect on their own and self-assess their own progress. this could be a topic for a whole, a whole another workshop, but the more we can get our students to reflect on their own progress and what did I do that worked, what could I do to do better, what areas do I still need to work on, that we are really going to help move them forward in their learning. And I think, again, I would say that my experience has been the more you detach that from grades, the more you're going to get honest reflection from them. That as a teacher, that's one of my main goals, which they can take with them and actually is a real life building skill. They won't, as Steph said, they're not going to remember participles. I accept that too. But if they build a habit of reflecting on their own performance and progress, that's going to really impact their future. So I like to invest in that as much as possible.
So I hope we've done a pretty, thorough job talking about our philosophy that goes into alternative assessment. We're going to take some time to look at examples of alternative assessments that we have used this school year or that we, plan to use at some point later in this same school year. I see some chats coming in. Unfortunately, because I'm sharing my screen, I can't respond to them. So I hope that if there are other questions that.
It was actually me. I said what they will take away and hold on to is really what we want them to remember forever. That's all it was.
Okay.
And I will tell you, yeah, I will keep an eye on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, anybody who has questions or ideas or just something to share, do feel free to add it to the chat and we'll touch on it either sooner or later. So I'll do the first share from this year. This is a project I invented this year. And the inspiration was actually my own experience in elementary school, where my teacher had a little paperback book of 10-minute mysteries. And when there were those fill-in times, like 10 minutes before lunch or, 5 minutes before dismissal, he would take out this little paperback book and read us a mystery. And I always thought, wouldn't it be great if I had that for the world of Cambridge? And I eventually realized, well, I can have my students write this. So I decided to pilot it this year. And as you can see, it starts very simple with my little objectives, because one thing that you guys can relate to, I'm sure, is this is not the year for perfectionism when it comes to cranking out elaborate projects and rubrics. So I decided to really keep it simple and see what my students would create. This was for 7th graders who are in Unit 1. So my objectives are, I want the students to create this 10-minute mystery story, and I want them to have it set in Pompeii, and they're going to have it be some kind of mystery. It should be about 10 minutes read aloud. They should use the Cambridge Latin course characters, but they can also invent new characters for the story. And they must include accurate historical details. So the two main things are, they're going to demonstrate their knowledge of the plot of Cambridge Latin course, Unit 1, and their knowledge of culture and the cultural setting of Pompeii in the 1st century CE. So they're going to do a little research using their Latin book and other resources to fill in details. Made my rubric really simple, and I had all the students enter their sort of title page into a slideshow. So this is an example of what one student's slide looked when he turned it in. So he's got the hunt for the gem thief, and he recorded himself reading the story and included a document, a Google Doc with the story. And he's written this story. So it turned out pretty well. And now I have this sort of growing database of stories. Yeah, you can check out the video. It's pretty cute. And
did you want to play it?
Fun to see what the students came up with too. You want to play a little bit of it now?
Sure.
The hunt for the gem thief by Caleb February. It was early in the morning in Pompeii, which is a Roman city near the Bay of Naples, and someone had stolen Caecilius, who was a banker in Pompeii's most prized possession, his favorite gem. Then Clemens, who was a servus or servant, decided to find out who stole Caecilius' gem at 3 a.m. the previous night. And he started off at the scene of the crime, We looked everywhere and found nothing. Then, all of a sudden, we found a trail of footprints leading to the atrium. The atrium is an open space in a house where the ceiling is up.
So that's a good spot to stop. And you can see that he explained what the atrium is. So that counts as one of his details of the Roman house. So you get the idea. And, you know, some of the kids had mistakes, of course, with their details, and we were able to work through those as they were working on their drafts. But students really enjoyed it. They enjoyed sharing their work, and they were able to learn a new tech skill, the skill of embedding their either recording, audio recording or video recording in the slideshow. So for most of them, that was a new skill. So there was also that little punch up their skills that way. So yeah, I call it a success.
As I'm moving through some of our examples, Steph and I have both linked each of our screen caps that's on the screen to the original document that's in our drive. So if you're on the presentation with us, you can access the examples from our drive with, view access so that you can, have something to refer to in the future. Okay, so, whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Okay. So I did a storybook project, and it was, I got inspiration from a bunch of different places. In fact, this very picture is from a member of the NACCP group, Patricia, I think, is the person who originally put this picture up here, although I think she did it in the summertime. And so I kind of like built from that, and I kind of built outwards. I always do a project with my Latin 2 students because they finish the Blue Book with me. They do the Blue Book in middle school or in 8th grade, and then they finish it when they get to their freshman year with me. So I always try to do some sort of project, but of course we were, limited with what we could do. And so I made this storybook project for them to really sort of flex their literacy muscles and give me an idea of their sense for plot development and characters and things like that. And so I wanted them to make, well, a storybook, and they were each assigned one of the they were assigned the stages of, or a stage, excuse me, from Unit 2. And then they did a personal retelling of the stories in the stage. Now, this is one of those things, I know that they're just going to look online for the translations. I know that they don't remember every single iota of every story that they did in 8th grade, especially because their 8th grade was cut short by COVID. So I knew what I was getting into, but I just wanted them to kind of get into the characters. And then for each story, I wanted them to take a picture that had to do with the story. Now, this was a little bit tricky because there were a couple of partnerships of students who don't live in the same house, but I had some really super creative students who like Photoshopped themselves in the same picture, or I did have a couple of kids who were friendly enough that they went over to each other's house, but they were masked inside, and you could tell that they were, very much keeping their 6 foot of distance within their friend's house. So, they were pretty cute and pretty attentive with their detail like that. So each story had like a 1 to 2 paragraph summary and then some sort of picture. And then I created this as an exemplar for them. I had taken this picture that Patricia had volunteered just to kind of give them an idea of what they were able to do. And I did say too that, they could use their younger siblings as, props or something like that. Or they could use older siblings or their parents or whatever. And so I did get some interesting like family involvement too. And sometimes it's cute. And I think that during the pandemic, a lot of these teenagers were like, all right. I don't need mom in my scene anymore, right? Like I'm done with having interaction with mom as regularly as I do. But they were still able to make good use of their homes and of their resources that were available. And then the rubric I used, it's fairly straightforward. And it was very easy for them to achieve, a winning score on it. So, just accurate summaries, whether or not the pictures represented the story. And, you know, because these stories have so many different dimensions and so many scenes and so many characters, it was really easy for them to find an opening that they could take a picture of. And then, you know, I had some students who went outside for some of the pictures, like they were talking about, you know, Salvius's farm and things like that. So they went outside and they took some pictures in the meadow. The presentation of the book. So I actually used a site called Book Creator for this. And so I showed the kids how to manipulate the pictures and stuff. And Book Creator is actually a really fabulous website that has a lot of capacity for students to be really creative. They could make it like a comic book. They could make it just like a storybook. They could edit their things with a lot of great detail. They could edit their font, etc. And then of course there's the obligatory, you know, meets technical requirements, like basically, did you do the project? And then in the rubric, I have a lot of opportunities for kids to shine too, so that students wouldn't feel like, you know, they're, you know, because I had a couple of groups who maybe they didn't have great pictures, but they had really interesting summaries, or vice versa, or the presentation of the book was really just phenomenal. And, you know, so they got extra points that way. Because again, I wanted them to have fun with this, and I wanted them to, I truly did want them to review the entirety of Unit 2, because it's such an important precursor for Unit 3. So I was trying to give them a motivation really to kind of get involved. Do you guys want to see a couple of the books that they created, or no?
Yeah, if we could have a quick look, that would be awesome.
Sure. All right. I'm
While
just
you're
gonna
pulling
get,
that up, I'll just say that I think this is a really cool way of, like, we get back to that idea of producing something with what you know, and that's really valued across various disciplines. So I think it's really cool when our discipline aligns with something that is seen as really important in learning in general. And I would just say that for those who are interested in active Latin or using original Latin, or if you're teaching in another language, like, this is a great opportunity to bring in bits of the target language too, as much as you want.
Oh, I archived it. That's why. Sorry. I had to just find it real fast. We can go to Anna's book here. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out, I had archived the book thing. Oh, here we go. That's how I have to do it. Sorry. Okay, so we can resume share. So this was the Book Creator website that I had used. It's really, really wonderful. It was shown to me at an NJCA meeting in the fall, and I really ran with it. So, you know, this guy was like really celebrating Quintus in Unit 2. This girl had some pretty interesting drawings. Here, I'll go to this one for a moment. So this is the type of book that they made. They ended up in a group of 3, not a big deal. So trace there, we recap, and then they had these images. So again, they like, you know, they Photoshopped themselves. And, you know, they used emojis to the best of their ability. And then they, you know, captured like the dog that was in the scene with Brigands. And then this is the fallen down barn. I have no idea how they found a picture of a barn that fell down, but it was so accurate. They just did such a cool job. And, you know, here they took like a screen cap from the book and then put an emoji with it. So it was really good. I liked the projects that they were able to prepare with this.
Well, you can see that the students' energy just shines through. These dark times, we all that brightness and that levity of something so creative and fun. It really just, I mean, it's a gift for them. It's a gift for you as a teacher too. I just love it when on the day that projects come in. It's like the most exciting. It's like Christmas or something.
Yeah. I honestly feel like I'm unwrapping presents. I'm like, ooh, what did I get from these kids, you know?
So this gets back to, you know, this is going back to my dilemma of how do we get grades, and what can we, if we can't ask for translations, then what can we ask for? So I like to use the SWYK, the show what you know opportunity, to check. And you could do this as a homework assignment, as like a pop quiz style assessment. And you can give the students an opportunity to show what they understand from a story. So I would typically let them use the Latin for this. So what they would have access to during one of these activities would be, you have the Latin story in front of you. What can you tell me about what these characters said? So in the story Controversia, what did each character have to say? And I'm doing paperless this year, so I put this in a Google slide and put text boxes and the little talking bubbles, and just let the kids type as much as they want to, and show what did Quintus say in his argument, what did Alexander say in his argument, and what did the teacher say in his argument. And if they can summarize those three things, they clearly read the story. They clearly comprehended the story. And that's my main goal. As Latin teachers and as teachers in general, we have different objectives, but my main objective with, consistent with the Cambridge Latin course is the ability to read Latin. Not the ability to translate Latin is not my primary goal. The ability to read and understand Latin. And then my other example is for the story Ad Templum. Ad Templum is the comic relief story in that stage where you have Quintus and Barbalus heading to the temple, and they run into the chatty friend. So I go back to my easiest assessment ever. Beginning, middle, and end. Every story has something happen at the beginning, the middle, and the end. So my students will just write about what happened in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And then as a bonus, there's that punchline at the end of the story about the gods saving, goddess Isis has saved us from this chatty guy because they demanded silence. So if they can include the punchline, then they really truly understood the story. So that's a way of checking for comprehension without checking for translation. This would be a great homework assignment to send home. So if we can't assign translations, this comes up in our chat, our online chats all the time. So I cannot assign a homework translation because the students can just go and find a translation. So then what can I do? So I can have them read the story in Latin, and then I can have them fill in this kind of task. Now you could say, well, your students could still just go and find the translation. That is true. However, because I've never assigned translations, my students do not tend to go and get them. They know that it's not a gotcha exercise. I'm not correcting them for their, translation of the imperfect. So the students are really a lot less tempted, and they just give it their best. And I always tell my students, say yes to the guess. Say yes.
I love it.
The guess.
That's a great.
Don't know, guess. And that's fine. And they'll say, well, what if I don't know? What if I don't know what happened in the beginning? What if I only know what happened in the middle and then what happened in the end? Then guess. Say yes to the guess.
I think we need a t-shirt.
I love it. I love it.
And because I have downplayed perfection, and I do get the luxury of teaching them year after year usually. So they know me, they trust me. They know I'm not out to get perfection out of them. And so it's a lot less riskier for them. And because of that, they'll give me honest tries. And I find that those honest tries are where the learning happens. So, and at least I know what they can do. So I had fun with these. And this kind of activity is really quick to crank out. Like I could do it in 5 minutes if I have to before class. And this year, no lie, that is often the case of doing it sometimes during class, true confessions, sometimes creating this during class because they're like, what's the homework again? And I'm like, what is the homework?
But I also really love this activity. I also love this activity too, because I think sometimes kids can't see the forest for the trees, and you can read an entire story with them via translation or something similar, and they're like, what just happened, And so I like this helps them to kind of, capitulate everything.
Well, because we also know the story well, so we kind of can get duped by the fact that they seem to be understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So from the realm of creativity, Amor Omnia Winkit is that epic story in stage 22 that has 3 very distinct parts to it. And so this time I made a project that has to do with Instagram stories. So for those of you who aren't quite as social media active, I suppose, an Instagram story is basically like a short, either a picture or a video that's only meant to be like up for a short period of time, that you're only meant to see for like 20 seconds. And in that picture or video, you have relevant hashtags that go with the image or relative emojis that go with the image or the short video. And so I applied this idea to Amor Omnia Winkit because it itself is, most of the scenes are dialogues between several characters. And so I wanted them to be that character on social media. And so this project in general was inspired by a project offered by Ditch That Textbook by Matt Miller, which by the way is a fabulous pedagogical tool if you're ever interested. So I'm going to show you real fast the project. I embedded all of the expectations here in a slideshow, and then I just kind of let them run with it. And even though, you know, about a third of my kids are remote or were remote at the time at least, it actually worked out really, really well to do the project like this. So each group had its respective role. That they had to be the media manager, they had to manage their slides and things like that. And this is taken in part by an assignment that was offered up to the Cambridge Latin Facebook group as well. But I've adapted it for the pandemic environment and for a more like current type of environment. They had to read their scene together. And again, this is one of those things that, yes, they might be able to translate their way through the story, depending on their level of comprehension or level of proficiency in Latin. But if all else failed and they got a translation from somewhere else, it's really not the end of the world, because they still have to be able to communicate and to show me that they understand what's happening in the scene throughout their Instagram stories that they create. So this is a pretty extensive project because I encourage them to storyboard it, you know, like not just everybody in their group kind of like figures it out on the fly, but like plan it out ahead of time. Tell me what are the important things that you want to deliver through each of your like mini Instagram stories that will eventually, you know, fade, if you will. And then there was a slide presentation, which I gave them a template for. They could record it with any medium on their phone. So I just grabbed some like icons. They could even record it in Instagram as long as then they, you know, downloaded it to their phone and then made it happen from there. And then they uploaded their videos. So it eventually became just like a slideshow with the videos. And then each slideshow had its own template, and the template was made to look like an Instagram story. So there was a template that was given, and they could just put in their like square video. So they had their instructions, and then they, you know, we watched them in class, and they were like really hilarious. And then the idea of the Instagram story too is that underneath here where it says write a message, the idea here is that they're supposed to caption it with a little bit of Latin from the story, but a little bit of humor too. So this story is the epic thing where Modestus is trying to get Vilbia from Gutta, to whom she had been engaged prior. So then they end up getting into a fight, and there's some funny scenes. So, you know, they might hashtag it like, you know, Modestus, or, you know, Modestus prepare to die, or, you know, something like that, which I know it seems dark, but that's just the kind of the way that their humor is delivered. Or, you know, when Modestus gets fooled by Gutta, who is dressed up like a woman. And so, or maybe that's Bulbus, but the point being, he gets fooled into thinking that it's actually Vilbia when it's actually a man. So, you know, the students took a video of the discovery, and the hashtag was like just hashtag what, you know, so like little things like that help them to bring that story to life. And so it was again, just kind of like a fun, creative assignment. So, all right, Steph, you want to talk about your voice powered things?
So, yeah, sure, thanks. So one of the ways that one of the trends in my assessing over the last few years is to do more and more with audio and video recordings. It's really important in having them actively practice reading the Latin, and also actively developing and practicing their communication skills in English as well. So I would say that probably half of my assignments, my homework assignments, are a record submitted as a digital recording, whether audio or video. So I thought I would just give a couple of examples of how I do this to create sort of a variety and good feedback for me on how they're doing. I'll also say that all of my homeworks are turned in on Google Classroom. And if you're going to do audio or video, Google Classroom makes it so easy to grade. Up until this year, I had my students submitting everything as email attachments or links emailed. So my inbox in my email got stuffed full of homework. It was disorganized and I like couldn't face grading it. This year, I'm using Google Classroom, which makes it so that I can literally listen, grade, turn back, next student, listen, grade, turn back, next, and click next student. So it's really easy to do this. You don't, as a teacher, have to listen to all of the recordings. Just listen to a little bit, see if they did it, and listen for the things that you are assessing for in this assignment. So don't feel like you have to listen to it all. It's their practice, the students' practice time, not your learning time. So here are 4 examples of a homework assignment or an in-class assignment or a remote module. I mean, you name it. These are very flexible times. So the first one is record the story Domitilla Cubiculum Parat in Latin and then retell the story in English. So they have to read the story in Latin. And I encourage them to listen on Elevate so that they can, mimic and model their reading off of the expert readings. And then to retell the story. And I use the word retell in their own words, not translate. So they're going to tell the story, basically plot summary for most of them. Every once in a while, I get a kid who will translate no matter what, but that's okay. I do so many recordings that the students don't get nervous about it anymore. And they also they know they're not supposed to be reading it. So if I catch anybody just reading work on these recordings, I talk to them and I say, I could tell that you were just reading it. Please don't do that. It's meant to be extemporaneous, you talking. I'm not looking for perfection. And if I communicate that to them enough times, they'll discard it and drop it by the wayside. And I sometimes will tell them, like, as you're telling the story, feel free to click around on the clickable stories for vocabulary words helps. It doesn't have to be a polished thing, but to retell it in their own words. And that's a good answer to the question, what do I do if I can't assign translations? My next one is, for example, record the story Bellimicus Ultor in Latin, and now imagine that you are Bellimicus. You're going to speak as Bellimicus, and in your Bellimicus's own words, you're going to explain what you're doing in the story and why you're doing it. And I want them to include feelings and beliefs and actions and use at least 3 Latin phrases from the story in their telling. So they have to go in and choose those strategically, and they have to have at least 10 minutes on this recording minimum. And this one is going to be really fun because this is a pretty charged story and it's exciting and there's a bear in it. And so getting the chance to speak as Bellimicus is really they're going to like doing this assignment. And so they're really going to be excited to go and find their 3 Latin phrases to use. Next one is a grammar. This is one we always talk about too in the Cambridge method, like how do I teach the grammar? When do I teach the grammar? What do I do about the language sections? And so I'm going to turn it on their head here and have them teach the grammar lesson. This is one thing in the past, many of us would like give little quizzes with charts on them and assign these things. And now we can't do that because they could just look it up, right? So then how are we going to help them master the material? Well, teaching it is probably a great way to do it. So they're going to make a video of themselves teaching it to their pet or their teddy bear. And they're going to teach all about the pluperfect tense and they have to use a couple of examples from the Latin sentences that are given there, and they have to make a 10 to 15 minute recording, which is a long time. So they really have to think about it. And you know, this is a pretty interesting, this will tell you a lot about how their approach is. And hopefully it just has them spend time with it. The creative way of having them spend time with it. And then my last one is kind of a fun one, another sort of getting you into the, it's like almost a chance to insert yourself into the world of Cambridge. So would you rather, after reading the events of stage 20, would you rather be treated by a medicus or an astrologus? And you have to defend your answer with at least 5 examples from either the culture essay or the stories. And they have to talk for 10 minutes. And that's a real, this is a middle school level assignment. 8th graders would be doing this for me. And that's a really great way to have them, it's just a very healthy skill for them to build in general. But so that's kind of a sampling of how I will use these recordings. And I also think for my colleagues in the modern languages who are struggling with the world of Google Translate and stuff, if any of you guys you know, share with your colleagues, this the idea of doing recordings, I think, is one way around that, getting the students to get away from having them just talk. And again, the trust level has to be there too. I'm not coming back to get you for your use of the imperfect. I am wanting you to just try, say yes to the guess. And if you build that relationship around this kind of assessing, it then becomes a bridge to growth, which is why we're doing this too. So there you go.
From the realm of audio and video recordings, I do a lot with Flipgrid, and especially in the last year with respect to the pandemic, I've been using Flipgrid a lot in the way that I will give students an assignment to do, and it might be, it could be not a translation, but we could work through a story on a pear deck. They might do a grammar review of some sort. And then what I do is I create a Flipgrid assignment. Now, Flipgrid, if you don't know, is a video recording tool. There's an app for it, so kids can use it on their phone. They can also just interface with their browser. So what I will do on Flipgrid is I will post the answers to the assignment in the Flipgrid assignment itself. And I will say, okay, here are the answers. Walk me through how your own answers measure up to what was originally given to you, and tell me what you thought. Like, how did you do? So then that's their chance to kind of look at theirs and look at mine and say, well, I think I did, you know, numbers 1 and 2 really well, but number 3 I was really stuck on, and I can see that the answer is such and such. So, you know, maybe I need a little more practice with identifying this tense, or I didn't really understand what was going on in this part of the story. And it's been a really valuable tool, I think, to give students that second look at a story. And I know, you know, if you've ever been to the workshops with Ginny and Martha and Donna, you know, they were always so, they still are, they're proponents of looking at a story 3 times, really, you know, so there's sort of like a preview of the story, there's your actual like full interaction with the story, and then there's, you know, a time to reflect on what the story said or what it meant or what it brought to your understanding of either culture or anything about the characters, anything. So this provides a really good look at a story for, you know, a second time or a third time, like looking back at the work that they've done for it. And so it also, because I have the answer key linked in this pretty secured environment, I'm not just giving them the answer key right there on Google Classroom so that they can kind of just like distribute it, you know. That also gives me a little bit of liberty that kids are not just giving the answers to their next person. But it helps them to develop an idea of growth mindset. I'll never forget, I had a kid, a freshman, who did a participle activity. It was like a sorting activity. And then I posted the answers and I said, you know, walk me through your answers. And he actually had this like really erudite thing. I mean, the kid's 14, maybe 15 max. And he's like, you know, I knew what I was doing for this section of it because we had done so much work in class to review it, and I was a little bit shaky on this section, and so I got one of them wrong, but the one I got wrong, and it was this brilliant thing that I was like, I cannot believe that you have this wonderful capacity to do this type of growth, you know, basically in front of me. I will say that with Flipgrid assignments, I mean, this is what Stefanie was saying before, like you can only listen, right, to so much because you only have certain amount of prep time. So sometimes with Flipgrid, there's a way to watch the videos on like, you know, 1.5, 1.75 or 2 times the speed. Sometimes depending on how much time I have, I'll watch the students' videos at like twice the speed because I can still hear what they're saying, but I don't have to listen through all the ums and the likes and the, well, maybe, you know, I can kind of cut to the chase a little bit. So I know we're we're running up on time here. So I would, do you want to see a Flipgrid example, or should we just move on?
Let's, yeah,
How-
let's, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, what else how much more do you have? I mean,
I think we have a few more examples to share. So I think that
okay,
might,
maybe not.
okay. Yeah, that's okay.
And if someone wants to see Flipgrid, maybe you can share a link or something at some
Sure.
point.
Yeah, please reach out if you do want to know more about any of our specific examples. I love how that assignment captures the idea of metacognition, and it requires metacognition of the students and that self-reflecting piece. And your example inspires me. I think that's a goal of mine for next year, is to include that as a part of the assignment much more often, so that I am prioritizing that when I design an assignment, include a self-reflection piece so that it's more training for them. I feel like when I'm busy and not enough time, that's the thing I never get to. So I want to front load that practice. I wanted to say a few things about, you know, the T word, tests. And which is a 4-letter word, by the way, test. And there was a recently in our Facebook group, there was a question about how do you use the test, right? Because especially now with the, you know, remote students at home doing it, it's like, how do I do this? And I wanted to share how I use the test and how I test using Cambridge resources in general, or how I assess. I try to be, I think a creative usage of all of our materials is really good. We have the attainment tests available in Elevate. We have all of the worksheets in Elevate. You can get the fabulae anculantes, the fabulae mirabiles, and mirabiliores. So we have all of these stories, and we have all these tests and worksheets, and what do we do with them? So I like to pull out the stories. I call them, again, show what you know stories. I love to do those frequently with comprehension questions, maybe a few short translation snippets, and I love the higher level analysis questions. So I will give those as assessments, and oftentimes I just peel those off the test. And so I feel like for some levels, especially middle school, the test is a little long to give. And then when you don't call it a test, also it's just like, okay, what do we do every day? We read stories. So what are we doing today? We're reading a story. And it just normalizes that, and it calms them down. So it's just not, I'm just want to find out what you can do. That's my approach. And then for shorter sort of formative assessments, I like to peel the grammar, that little grammar. It's usually a 5-point grammar section from the test.
Right.
And give that at a well-timed position. It's like a really quick idea. Okay, you got 3 out of 5. All right, you still need practice on whatever it might be, the genitive. And then I also really like using some of the worksheets as a little formative assessment as well. Also because, like, you know, a lot of the worksheets are up on Quizlet now, so some of the students do start to realize that. And when you give them in class as an in-class work, or a timed, if you're remote, if you have students remote and it's timed, then you won't have to worry about them. You just know it's their work. That's my kind of go-to for cheat proofing when it comes to the show what you know stories. If you are doing it open book, then they'll take 3 hours because they'll want to look up every word. So one of the things I realized really soon after I started giving these an open book was that they just were like, I need more time. So he was like, no, you're only going to have 20 minutes to do this. You must complete it in 20 minutes. And so they know they could look up maybe 4 words, not 25 words. So that's been my solution. Is if you are going to do it with a time limit, you're not going to have time to look up all the answers. So I don't know if that will work across the board, but it's been pretty good for me.
Excellent. So one of the elephants that might be in your room right now is the final exam. My administration thankfully canceled final exams a couple months ago, so I don't have to deal with it this year, and I didn't have to deal with it last year because, again, the same prudence applied. But if you are in the position where you need to craft some sort of final that is supposed to be this big, like, summative thing, I thought I would mention a couple of the projects that I've done in the past for the end of the year, and you can kind of use it to adapt to, you know, something. This final exam project is one humongous show what you know. I have 2 different versions here because I gave this the first year and then I tweaked some things and I gave it the second year. So if you look at both versions, you're going to see that they're a little bit different. But the basic gist of each of these projects is each student was randomly assigned a stage that we covered in my class between September and well, May, I guess. And then they had to recover it in the form of a presentation. So in the form of stories that we had read, they had to remember what it was about, you know, maybe retranslate it, but present it in like a creative way. They had to reteach the grammar. They had to make very explicit connections between the culture that was discussed in the stage and the stories. So, you know, I'm thinking to stage 9, which is what I did for my exemplar for them. Stage 9 is about the bathhouse in Pompeii, right? So, but where in the stories do you see examples of how the Pompeians use the bathhouses? Where are examples of, you know, using the changing room? Well, what do they use the changing room for? Or in the story, you know, Quintus was in the palaestra, you know, hanging out with the athletes. Well, what's the palaestra? What's the big idea behind that? So they had to be very explicit about those connections. But it was a very creative enterprise for them. And again, it encouraged them to show what they remembered from that particular stage. In version 2, the one thing that I added to it actually was a new story that didn't appear the first time that we read through the stage. And that new story came from the Fabulae Oncolantes or other ancillary resources. I didn't use the attainment test because I didn't want them to have that, like, you know, publicly available. And so they had to not only recap some of the stuff that we had done with respect to that stage, but then they had to apply that same knowledge to a new story. Now, I say new story, but it's a group project, and the story itself was maybe like 10 lines. It was, you know, a snippet. And I wasn't, you know, as Steph was saying before, I wasn't looking for an exact translation of what was happening. I just wanted them to be able to read through it enough to, you know, make a drawing for that story, as well as the stories that were in the formal stage that they were covering. And then again, connect the culture and, you know, do that other stuff so that I could kind of assess a little bit, you know, can you take a new version of the written word in the target language and be able to do the same things that we do with stories on a regular basis. So for each of these projects, the rubric, and, you know, again, everything here is clickable, so you can go ahead and click on it and view it. If you have questions about it, I'm more than happy to discuss further at any point in time. So each of these has a pretty extensive description of what the project is. This is the rubric that I used. And if you look at the rubric and if you were to look at the mechanics of it, it's like impossible to actually fail the project. It's impossible to get, I think, lower than like a 65 on the project. So everybody passes. It's just a question of like to what degree of passing, you know, do you emerge from the project? But again, you know, it's such an open door opportunity. I wanted the kids to succeed. You know, Steph and I were talking about this. I feel like when it comes to a final exam, I've stopped doing formal, traditional, multiple choice type exams. You know, I stopped that 5, 6, 7 years ago. I don't even know when, because it was crazy how much time the kids were spending preparing and memorizing, and then essentially just regurgitating a bunch of material that you told them to memorize. And then, you know, 2 hours later, they couldn't possibly regurgitate as that same material because it was all gone. So, you know, to what aim then should the final exam be? And so I've just been stretching toward a, you know, show me what you know, apply a little bit of that in sort of a limited capacity, but in general, I wanted to make it an open and achievable project for everybody to do. And then as far as timing goes, I've just always given my students the 2-hour block of time that we're given during exams to just work on the project. And they get to work with a group that they choose. They know their stage. They only find out their stage, I think, usually that day. So that helps with a little bit of the authenticity. Like, they can't prepare materials. They can't come in with their binder full of stage 22 stuff, that they can still sort of like act on the fly. So there's a little bit of accountability that way, which kind of goes back to Steph's notion of like timing it and making sure that there's a bit of a limit to what they're showing. But this has been really successful for me the last couple of years. And so if you find yourselves in the position where you also have to plan some sort of final adventure, I hope that this might be helpful to you to sort of explore different ways of doing the same thing. It's 8 though, so.
Thank you, Stephanie and Stephanie. Really good suggestions. I hope that gave everybody a shot in the arm as we finish up this school year. And thank you everyone for attending this evening.